enough. So in the end, we handed over to a country which was not properly prepared for independence. I think that we would have done Africa a lot of good by staying and preparing flat out for another 5 or 6 years.
But for Africans everywhere, decolonization couldn't happen fast enough.
For that generation of Nigerians, it was just a feeling of complete euphoria, of triumph, of total confidence in the future of Nigeria. They really believed that Nigeria was, and all of Africa, I mean, they were Pan-Africans. They believed very much in the idea that the whole of Africa was going to rise from the shackles of the past.
Dream, big hope. People thought that independence will bring about the solution to many problems. So it was in a very romantic period. Celebration of independence, dances, big projects.
That euphoria wouldn't last.
I think the 60s were a very violent decade, and so the initial euphoria disappeared very, very quickly within a year, maybe 2 years, and then from 62 to 1970, it was just one incident of violence, of carnage after another.
It faded when the military began to seize power, and the military are not leaders, they are not political figures, they only are specialized in what? In the use of the weapon and so on. They have no political mission except to maintain the security of the country and so on. So you have the coming of new leadership for whom nobody voted. That was a terrible fact.
Many newly sovereign states of Africa, left with the legacies of occupation and the challenges of state building, were soon consumed by bitter power struggles. In many places, militiamen overran the nationalist thinkers. Within the first 20 years of independence, there were 40 successful coups and many more failed ones. Former British territories were torn apart by ethnic conflict as the dark side of ruling by proxy gradually came to light.
One of the problems with independence when it came was that the colonial powers hadn't ruled Nigerians as Nigerians. They ruled them as Hausa people or Yoruba people or Igbo people. They had ruled Kenyans as Kenyans, but as Kikuyu or Luo people. And suddenly they all had to be Kenyans, Nigerians. And very quickly the politicians naturally looked to their own people for their political power base, and politics became very ethnicized.
In the 30 years which followed the Year of Africa, 2 million people are thought to have died in ethnic violence in ex-British colonies alone.
In the case of Nigeria, basically when the British left in 1960, they left a political class that was already, even at that point, divided against itself. They had a system where the chiefs and the kings ran things and just reported to the district officers. In Western Nigeria, as a result of this encounter, schools were built, churches were built, and very quickly an educated elite emerged. In the north, again with the same system, the chiefs and the kings said, okay, we accept you as our colonial power, but can you just stay out of our business of things? And so they, in most parts of the north, they would not allow churches and schools to be built. The consequence of that, about 100 years later, was that there was an imbalance between the north and the south. In the end, ended up in a civil war.
But elsewhere, the problem wasn't the rate of decolonization, but the lack of it. France redefined its relationship with its African colonies to become the unseen hand in national affairs. Quietly, French control was going underground.
The French never really left at independence. Behind, for many years afterwards, you would go to a ministry in Francophone Africa. You would talk to the minister, who would be African. Behind the door, there would be a Frenchman, signing the checks, doing the accounts, reporting to Paris.
In 2006, President Sarkozy promised a cleanup of the French foothold in Africa. No more secrets, real independence. But Bastille Day celebrations in Paris this year sent a clear message that they remain as closely interested in the continent's affairs as they ever were. Ever since independence, domination of resources has continued to fuel violence in many states, with former Belgian Congo still seemingly locked in a vicious cycle of conflict over its mines. African rulers, foreign multinationals and governments have continued to strike deals to plunder commodities and helped cripple national economies already set back by the colonial experience.
I suppose in the 19th century the Europeans just went in, enslaved people, forced them to dig and took it all for themselves. I think these days there's a complicity between the rulers of Africa and Western companies or middlemen.
Mines in whichever country you're talking about needed somebody to bring in the personnel and the equipment to dig out the minerals, to employ people to continue to dig out the minerals, to maintain the place. Outside investment, then, as now, is terribly important.
The continuing diversion of minerals isn't the only exploitative practice. Today, Africa is the largest recipient of external aid in the world, a continent where half the population survive on less than $1 a day. But for every aid dollar coming in, $10 are lost through illegal capital heading out.
$437 billion has left Africa between 2000 and 2008. Left it illicitly, secretly, illegally. And much of that has flowed into tax havens owned by European countries, Britain particularly. And so the ordinary people of Africa haven't benefited from this last decade, which has been a very good decade for Africa economically. But when you go there, you still see people as poor as ever.
Under a shadow financial system built on the ruins of colonialism, foreign banks and multinationals working in Africa avoid paying tax. Anonymous trust accounts, fake foundations, money laundering, tax havens, and trade mispricing all go unchecked. Since 1970, an estimated $854 billion has been lost, enough to have wiped out external debt, and have left $600 billion more for development. The financial rewards can be traced back to those countries proudly bailing out a dependent Africa with aid, a striking parallel to the colonial story. Also echoing the past, China is entering the scene once monopolized by Europe, opening up options for African commerce.
The process of decolonization is still unfolding. It's quite interesting that China has now come into the scenario, vying for contracts and for rights to exploit natural resources with European countries.
It's China's demand for African resources which has pushed their prices globally. That's actually been very good for Africa. But whether African governments are really taking the best advantage of this one-off opportunity to sell what's under their soil I'm not sure. The jury's out. This is the moment to build the infrastructure, to educate people, bring health to their people, and I'm not sure that that is being done as effectively as it might be.
While Nkrumah's United States of Africa may never have materialized, Africa today does have success stories, like Botswana, where diamond revenues have financed development under a multi-party government, and Senegal, where democracy, stability and civil liberties have characterized the past 50 years of self-rule.
I think we can be very confident about the future of Africa. Africa espouses education, it espouses modernity. It is also becoming more and more democratic.
We have not just the natural resources, but the intellectual resources, the strength of character.
I believe a lot in the new professional classes. These are not the elites who have robbed Africa. These are world-class professionals. They've got an uphill struggle, but I think Africa may have turned the corner.
Whether days of empire or nationhood, for over a century now, the world's relationship with Africa has been built on disparity. Africa's wealth has helped bankroll the giant strides in technology, communications, and business made elsewhere. But by safeguarding natural riches, prioritizing national interests, and with trade and development done on equal terms, there's a chance the coming 50 years could break the cycles of the past and finally bring real independence.
We should not make colonialism responsible of everything bad in Africa. After all, for 50 years, some of these countries have been independent. Now, I will agree with you as a historian that 50 years are not long enough. But 50 years are enough to begin to see clearer where to go. We have to insist on the responsibility of the African leadership also. The natural bounties given by nature and God, instead of being a curse, may well become a new opportunity for better tomorrows under democracy, transparency, great respect of the law.
Enough. So in the end, we handed over to a country which was not properly prepared for independence. I think that we would have done Africa a lot of good by staying and preparing flat out for another 5 or 6 years.
Big dream, big hope. It was very romantic. Do it. Tens of thousands indeed of Africans of all confession, Christians, non-Christians, Muslims, Arabs and blacks who made that force.
For de Gaulle, the leader of Free France, their show of loyalty would not go unrecognized.
After World War II, there were reforms in the colonial system. The French began to introduce in the Constitution of 1945 and 1946 the idea of extension of citizenship to all people, regardless of his or her level of education. The British began to appoint Africans to the assemblies in their respective colonies and so on.